Hello, 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 hello. Good morning. This is coffee cup number 1, and I am so ready. It's like 7:30 here in the morning. We need to get time to react to this one. It's a long one, so brace yourself. But because you're a Warhammer fan, probably, then you can handle some minutes, and that is so cool. It's so fun. But maybe we should just jump into it. If you haven't seen part 1, you should check that out. It's probably gonna pop up around here in the top there, the little small card. If not, you can find it on my YouTube channel. Okay, this is Lutin 09 Lutin, the Emperor of Man 2. It's the part 2, Heresy, and the Imperium Warhammer 40k lore / history. At the end of the previous one, or like the previous one was like super informative, and it was so good. I felt like I learned so much. I'm still a noob, I feel that, but I learned so much. And we went through like, what was the ages? I don't remember exactly what they're called, but it was like the start of human civilization, and then it was like the golden ages / dark ages, and then we went into strife, right? And then into, oh, what was that called? The one after that, I don't remember what it's called, but the one the Emperor showed, or like came to, built his Primarchs, or the Thunder Warriors first, and then took Terra, then Space Marines / Primarchs, then killed Thunder Warriors. We don't talk about that. And then the Primarchs got like scattered across the universe. The Emperor were like taking the outpost planets back and finding the Primarchs, but then he found out, or like the crusade went really well, and he took so much of the universe, and the Primarchs were doing a really good job. They could do this, so Daddy went back to his castle, and that is when the previous one ended. Because, yeah, not because, but I think we're gonna start with some heresy here. With some real heresy. Maybe it's the horse heresy I've heard about, but I'm gonna get so much information now probably. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah, buddy. There's only war. Oh. Is he gonna read it, or am I gonna read it? Okay, I guess I'll read it. They are my bulwark against the terror. They are the defenders of humanity. They are my space marines, and they shall know no fear. The Emperor of mankind. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Oh, this is so good. The Emperor of Man, part 2. Hell yeah! Oh, I cannot wait. I'm just too eager. This intro needs to be over with. I need information. Okay. Humanity is entering the 31st millennium. The Emperor's crusade to reunite humanity is a resounding success. Should I read all of this? The Astartes Brotherhood stands stronger than ever. I'll just do it. Wow. Humanity stands at a crossroads. Total victory and reunification. Oh, it's the reunification wars, right? Of the human race is a near certainty. Nothing can stop us. Ay, 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 ay. So freaky face. The Horus Heresy. Oh, goosebumps.
The 31st millennium of man would be one of the darkest and most destructive humanity had faced.
Oh.
It would bring the newly established Imperium to its knees and deal wounds so severe it would never truly recover.
Whoa.
I need to say that this section of Imperial lore is vastly complex and heavily documented. Bearing that in mind, I'll be covering it in a briefer fashion as specific events can be looked at later in time. However, the 31st millennium is one of the most important periods as it deals with the fall of humanity as a truly dominant power and the inception of the Imperium that would exist into the 41st millennium.
Heresy. Heresy.
The Horus Heresy. This was essentially a mutiny by several Primarchs and their Space Marine legions, a betrayal against the Emperor and the Imperium instigated by the War Master 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀.
Aye, aye, aye.
Now, considering how much is written about these events, it actually takes place over a very short time scale in the general scheme of events in 40k, lasting for only about 7 years.
7?
As I already outlined, this rebellion ultimately was orchestrated by, at this time, the unknown forces of chaos. Yet, there were many secondary factors, and arguably, even without the influence of chaos, it seems possible that these events could have taken place without dark suggestions from the warp, albeit likely to a lesser extent.
Whoa.
The Emperor's return to Terra to establish new projects that for whatever reason he was unwilling to also share with even Horus or any of the Primarchs left them feeling set aside and cast out from his circle of trust.
Also, it didn't, like, when the Emperor went back, he went back, so that is one thing, that they got a little bit like, Daddy, we want to fight with you, why did he go back? But he also didn't share what he was working on. He didn't want to say. Maybe they thought like, oh no, he's gonna make even better Primarchs now, and we're gonna be like the number 2s, and maybe we're gonna become the Thunder Warriors, and they're gonna just bam us right in the face. Maybe. Whoa. And it only lasted 7 years? I feel like I have to say that out loud, because that was weird. I feel like it's such a vast universe, and everything is so big, and so massive scale, and time is so huge and everything. 7 years. That is kind of wild. That is efficiency when it comes to wars. Or I guess, isn't it still going on in some way? So when it's like 7 years, is it really, what marks the end of the 7 years? That's gonna be interesting to hear. Probably gonna hear that.
This would lead to feelings of resent or in some outright anger and disgust. This was less though about ego or pride than it was trust, although there is no doubt these emotions were an element in play. Primarchs, despite their demi-godlike stature and ability, were fundamentally human at the core. It was more about their deep connection to the Emperor, and perhaps that they saw themselves not as equal, but at least on a similar level to him. His retreat to Earth and abandonment of them at this juncture certainly left them feeling consigned to the rest of humanity. These feelings were surely only fragments of doubt, not an outright stab to the heart, but nonetheless the seeds of mistrust were sown, and those chinks in the armour of the Imperium were exactly what the dark warp entities of chaos looked for.
Yeah.
Another factor in the resentment and frustration felt by the Primarchs and some higher officers in Space Marine legions would be the Council of Terror. This was a governing body charged with the administration and infrastructure control of the Crusade and Imperium as a whole. It was controversial among the Astartes as it comprised an all-human council. Primarchs and Space Marines alike were not given permission to sit with the Terra Council.
Whoa, this is interesting facts. So the governing people, the government basically of Terra, that was like in charge of like the infrastructure war, like handling, could not have any Space Marines or Astartes. Wow, it's like a punch to the gut probably for them, because they, for the longest time, they have probably felt like they were above people. You know, it's the Emperor, and then it's us around here, and then it's like people. It's not even on the screen, man, the people. Don't you dare, Emperor Daddy.
Their role was for that of war, and all military matters were handled by the War Master. One of the most primary council members was the previously mentioned 𝗦cie the Sigillite.
Oh, yeah.
𝗦cie was no simple man, though. He was a psyker of immense power and used these abilities to reach out into the vast realms of space.
Wow.
He was a close aide to the Emperor during Earth's unification wars and is said to have formed the Administratum of Terror. So he is no mere administrator, but a vastly important figure, as important in fact as any Primarch. Some of the Emperor's sons, though, did not feel that the Imperium should be run by human bureaucrats, and so the Council of Terror would become another chip on the shoulder and a contributing factor to heresy.
Oh.
One last and specific act, though, would turn at least one Primarch away from the Emperor and continue to raise doubts in others. The disciplining of 𝗦ci.
Oh?
𝗦ci was the Primarch of the Word Bearers, or as they often referred to themselves, the Bearers of the Word. The word referred to is the Emperor's word.
Whoa.
However, the Word Bearers were almost fundamentalist in their beliefs. 𝗦ci believed with every fibre of him that the Emperor himself was a divine being, one true god of mankind. They believed this.
And, is this one of like the hidden legions or something? Or maybe I didn't hear well enough in the every Space Marine Legion explained. Is this one of those hidden ones? Maybe we're gonna get some news about that here right now. That because the Emperor didn't want any like belief, like religion-esque things going on. Maybe he just like butchered the guy. Maybe. And also, second cup of coffee here. Cannot wait. I love the coffee. Oh.
To the core and preached it across their homeworld as well as any they encountered during the expeditionary crusades.
He's crying.
But the Emperor had long since outlawed any concept of belief and religion, imposing a strictly secular rule of law in the Imperial Truth to create a constructively rationalist society. For the longest time, though, these religious emanations were suspected and tolerated by the Imperial Council, and even to an extent by the Emperor. Eventually, however, the Word Bearers came under closer scrutiny by the simple fact that by comparison to other legions they were unbearably slow with their conquest rate during the Crusade. An investigation fleet was sent by the Imperial Council to establish what was causing this slow progress. On arrival at some of the conquered worlds of the Word Bearers, they found their answer. To the fleet commander's horror, they had discovered that the Word Bearers had been spending years indoctrinating and converting the worlds to the illegal and false faith of the Imperium.
I knew it. I had a feeling. So they were preaching too much. They were just preaching too much. It's almost like me whenever I stream. It's like I talk way too much. I talk all the time. You maybe feel this about like these videos as well, though. But damn.
This was a tediously slow process and took significantly longer than usual conquests, as was often so bloody due to the worlds initially resisting having an enforced faith. This egregious practice was considered an abject failure of duty by the Imperium and the Emperor himself. Worse still, it came to light that the Word Bearers had been employing a standard practice to execute those who did not renounce their faith and accept that of the Imperium and Emperor as the divine faith, which only served to pour more fuel onto the flames of outrage. The Emperor was absolutely enraged by this notion that he should be worshipped as a god, and the actions of the Word Bearers in his name, slaughtering those who refused to accept the Emperor's divinity, stank of the religious excesses that had so often poisoned human history, and the Emperor had witnessed firsthand throughout the ages.
It is so cool though, because he gets so angry that people are looking at him like a god, and that is like the opposite of what very many people up in the ages would have like felt. So it's so cool because it makes him even stronger of a character, you know? Oh, it's so epic. I love it. He's a pretty hardcore guy, this Emperor. It's a pretty hardcore guy. I love it. I love it. But you guys can call me a god. It's okay. It's okay. It's a little bit of heresy, but it's okay. It's okay.
So the word bearers had not only broken his principal rules, but also wasted vast amounts of time and resources.
Yeah.
All the worlds they had brought into the Imperium had to be purged in an extremely traumatic process, wasting more lives and more resources. To balance these incomprehensible actions, the Emperor would publicly humiliate 𝗦ci. To publicly reprimand a Primarch in front of his Space Marines and even present humans was an unprecedented act, and it cut 𝗦ci to the core. In one encounter, his faith was publicly ripped from him by the Emperor, and all the worlds they had conquered were to be purged. 𝗦ci.
What does it put into purged? Do they just murder all of these, like, people that got screwed with? That seems like a not okay thing to do. Can't he just go over there and say, I'm not a god, but you still have to follow me, okay? Because of other reasons. But I'm not a god. And then move over to the next planet, say, I'm not a god. Or something. I don't know. Purging seems like a little bit too much. Poor people. They got like... First they got like found out by this guy and got like preached to death. And then they just murdered them to death.
Was beside himself, as were all the word bearers, to not only have their faith burned away, but to also know that all their years of efforts counted for naught was an unbearable burden to carry.
Yeah, it's like, oh, the word bearers, that is like heavy duty. Like, it can't feel much worse than that, probably. That is awful. Or like, it can, probably, if you like really think about horrible things. But faith is such a strong thing in a lot of people. So if you like shit on their faith and then shit on all the work they've done, it's a big thing to handle.
It is said that the Emperor did not want to break and ruin the word bearers or 𝗦ci. He was not vindictive in that way. He wanted to merely set them back on the path to being an effective force for the Imperium and mankind. To cure this corruption, the Emperor turned to the glorious Ultramarines and 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀, known for his exceptional tact and unflinching loyalty to the Emperor. The Ultramarines were the word bearers' mirror and shadow alike in so many ways and different in so many others. A living example of what the word bearers had the potential to be. The Emperor ordered a task force comprised of Ultramarines, his elite personal bodyguards, and the Imperial Council regent 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 the Sigillite. Their mission? To raise the capital city of the planet 𝗑 to the ground.
Whoa.
A planet of high importance to the word bearers, who considered its capital, 𝗦𝗡cia, the perfect city because of the citizens' intense religious devotion and the sheer number of cathedrals and monuments dedicated to the worship of the Emperor as the god of humanity.
Wow.
Following a temporary mass evacuation of bewildered human citizens who could not understand what crime they had committed, sent out distress signals to the word bearers, who they considered to be angels.
Damn.
The Ultramarines, though, continued their mission and engaged in the orbital destruction of 𝗦𝗡cia.
What?
The Wordbearers Legion arrived to answer the distress calls of the planet, only to find to their utter confusion the Ultramarines in orbit. The Wordbearers were ordered to assemble planetside. 100,000 Marines were ordered within sight of the smouldering raised ruins of 𝗦𝗡cia, where the Emperor himself stood. The word-bearers were forced, along with all others in attendance, including 𝗦ci, to kneel before him in the ashes of the city, which stood for all they had believed and done in the name of the Emperor and the Imperium.
Wow, this is like, this is making me think about like raising my daughter, you know, and how difficult it is in general. Like I'm looking at this Emperor right now as the daddy, and then you have like the Primarchs as his children, right? So should he like say no, or should he take away the chocolate? Or should he, like, how should he do that? How should he go around with things and do the racing? Because I feel like right now it's pretty like straightforward with my daughter, because it's more like making her survive. She's so young. But once I get into parenting, it's gonna be so much more difficult, you know? And like the Emperor right here, is he going a little bit too hard? Is he being too hard on them? Should he have talked to them a little bit more? Or is he going straight for the go to the room and don't come out in 3 days kind of a thing? That is I'm trying to like over exaggerate here, of course, but it's just a little bit wild. I crush your town there that you love with all the people you love, and then I'm gonna make you kneel in their ashes. It's just a little smack on the hand, you know.
He explained to them in no uncertain terms that they had failed in duty, that their efforts had been futile, and wasted beliefs were an abhorrence. He was no god, no angel, no divine being, but a man. No such belief would be permitted in his Imperium. The Emperor departed, leaving a Primarch humiliated and a legion humbled. 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶 was physically and psychologically numbed by the Emperor's actions. The razing of the city of 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶 was a trauma almost too great for many of the word-bearers to cope with, and had it not been for their strength of genetics, they would have likely been mass suicides and insanity. 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶 himself, though, fell into a deep melancholy that would burn harder and brighter within him as days turned to weeks, turned to months. Why is this sequence of events so important? In the future years of the Imperium, it was said that all that would later come to pass was born in this microcosm.
Wow.
That the mission and humiliation carried out here would be recalled as the catalyst of a galactic civil war. The ruination of the word-bearers is critical in understanding the next sequence of events. They were left reeling from the events on 𝗑, as well as the ritual humiliation and destruction of the Legion's faith. The fate of the word-bearers at this time is sketchy due to the destructive nature of this period and the events to follow. But it is known that they disappeared for a time, seemingly lost in a whirlwind of confusion, disillusionment, and even rage.
Whoa,
The Emperor's hope that they would be...
It like makes sense after you've been put in the room for 3 days. You're gonna get a little bit mad. You're gonna get hungry, gonna get thirsty, gonna get angry. It makes sense. It makes sense that they're lashing out a little bit. It feels so good. It's so early in the morning. I am still not awake totally, but I'm just like, it's hard to explain, but I'm just getting transported into the universe here, and I'm just like enjoying the story. But I'll try not to pause as much, because then we're gonna be sitting here for 10 hours. But holy moly, this is so good.
Set straight on the path of the Imperial truth was flawed, and their resentment hugely underestimated. Instead, they withdrew, wandering the galaxy, seeking, waiting for a light of clarity to guide them. It seems likely that 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶's fall began after 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶, that the dark powers of the warp reached out to him in his despair and offered him that which the Emperor had denied him, a divine power to believe in. It is not known whom these voices that counselled him were. It's possible, but entirely speculative, that as with Horus later, some of his closest officers, such as Erebus, the word-bearer's first chaplain, would be the first to be corrupted and then begin the spread of darkness. What is certain, though, is that when the word-bearers reappeared to rejoin...
Is this a word-bearer? Are they going like a little bit insanely crazy?
The Great Imperial Crusade, they appeared to be refocused as the Emperor had hoped, but this was far from the truth. The word-bearers now no longer served the Emperor or humanity, and were the very first Space Marine Legion to fall to the darkness of chaos.
They were the first?
The war between humanity and chaos would still not come until more of the Emperor's crusading forces had been seeded with dark betrayal. Horus Lupercal, favourite of the Emperor, War Master of the Crusade, would become the apex of these events.
Wow.
The real treachery would begin on a small planet named Davin. This world had been easily absorbed into the Imperium by Horus and his legion, the Lunar Wolves, some 60 years previously. The warrior people living there quickly realised they were outclassed and bowed to the powers of the Imperium. Horus was impressed with their realism, honour and strength. Spending time there, the Lunar Wolves brought away from Davin the concept of the Warrior Lodge, a close clique of senior brothers who would share their knowledge and opinions evenly, without rank obstruction.
Wow.
The concept of lodges, guilds or clans within a legion or imperial force was strictly outlawed by the Emperor as something which could brew dangerous opinions and dissent. as evidently turned out to be the case. Horus decided that he knew better. Now,
Horus, you decided you knew better. Here we got it, guys. He thought he was better than the Emperor. God damn you, Horus. Oh.
Erebus, the aforementioned first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, was at this point fully corrupted by chaos.
That is so sick
He
of an
reported
image.
to the Lunar Wolves that Commander Temba, the governor of Davin, and his forces had turned renegade and dug themselves into a fortress on Davin's moon. Horus led an assault force to clear the moon and extract Temba personally. On the surface, his forces were confronted by the foul, reanimated remains of Temba's outpost, who had evidently succumbed to the chaos plague of Nurgle's rot, skewing them into horrific parodies of the human form. Horus slew the grossly altered Temba personally, but not before Temba managed to strike a blow to Horus using the advanced blade, the anatheme.
Wow.
The anatheme, you will recall, was the highly advanced blade stolen decades previous by Erebus from the people known as the Interrex.
Wow.
The weapons appeared to be semi-sentient, as the Interrex claimed the weapons could be instructed to recognize a particular person, which gave them the ability to mortally wound that person.
Wow.
The Interrex did not know how to produce these weapons, but had confiscated them from a Xenos race known as the 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀. It seems clear that Erebus orchestrated the whole sequence of events on Davin's moon, and potentially worse, had already been corrupted by chaos even prior to his theft of the anatheme from the Interrex years before. The distorted, chaos-riddled Temba had been instructed to speak Horus Lupercal's name to the blade. This meant that upon striking the greatest Primarch of the Imperium, it would wound him in such a way as to be beyond even his demigod-like powers of healing. The fate of the anatheme would still have importance in the years to come. Horus was taken back to his ship, the Vengeful Spirit, where apothecaries frustratingly determined his wound could not be healed naturally or otherwise. Horus's Mournival, his lodge of closest officers, took him in their despair to the Serpent Lodge on Davin, where Erebus assured them he knew how to heal the War Master in a special spiritual ceremony. This was, of course, all part of Erebus's plan.
Maybe.
During this ritual, Horus's spirit would be transferred into the warp along with Erebus, disguised as one of the War Master's closest friends, Hastur Sejanus, captain of the 4th Company.
Sneaky!
This out-of-body experience showed Horus a terrifying vision of the future, which unbeknownst to him were caused by his very actions, bringing the Imperium into an age of repressive, violent and superstitious regime where the Emperor and some of the most loyal Primarchs were worshipped as divine beings by the fanatical and ignorant masses of humanity.
Aye, aye, aye.
The Chaos Gods portrayed themselves as the victims of the Emperor's psychic might, who had been suppressed throughout the ages and had no interest themselves in controlling the material world. Horus, already having grown jealous and deeply resentful of the perceived poor treatment at the hands of the Emperor, and was one of many of the Astartes legions afraid of the concept of a peace wherein all for which they had fought would be turned over to weak-willed mortal men, whilst his legions were cast aside and left as peacekeepers without a purpose. These
That is a very interesting fact on top of all of the other facts, though. But it's getting really interesting when he's getting turned over to the other side here. But which part? Which part? What is? Yeah, they're afraid of peace. But it kind of makes sense, though, being in war for such a long time, and you have a purpose, you are doing something, and you feel like, you're doing something that is right, that is good, that is like, you're having goals and stuff like that, and then you're all of a sudden just gonna be plopped somewhere and just gonna stand there and just like, is there any danger here? Is there any danger? Nah, it's no danger. It's like scary. It's scary, probably. Like, for me also, it's so important to have like purpose and goals, or else I'm getting a little bit depressed, to be honest. So I can see that, but you should still not go against your daddy like that, Horus. And also like looking down on humans like that, it's also very interesting. But Kind of makes sense after like fighting for such a long time, just colonizing, taking over planets with humans. You see that you are stronger than them, and you can quickly probably feel like a better person or whatever, better being. Wow.
These were the Emperor's wishes.
Ooh.
For you see, the Astartes were always a tool to save humanity and bring power back to mankind, not just to subjugate it. Horus, in his weakened and embittered state, was very suggestible and would accept this twisted and misunderstood prophecy. But there was one thing Erebus had not counted on. Horus's brother, Magnus the Red.
Why does Magnus have horn pits? I don't know. Maybe it's cool, maybe it's strange. I feel like it's a little bit strange. Magnus. Is this Magnus the nerd?
Primarch of the Thousand Sons, a legion and chapter who had widely embraced psychers and their unique powers, had continued to study the forbidden arts of warp manipulation and sorcerous powers. The Cyclopean giant of Magnus appeared within Horus's vision, revealing Erebus' true identity and begging Horus not to fall in to the temptations of chaos. It was all in vain though. Horus had by now already decided that if anyone deserved to be worshipped as a god, then it was he. The godlike warp demons of chaos healed Horus's wounds, and between them made a deal.
What?
In exchange for the immense power he would gain, as well as ruling power over the mortal galaxy, he would deliver to them the Emperor, who the dark chaos gods feared most, as they knew he alone stood with enough power to potentially destroy them.
That is the deal? That is the deal? Wow. Okay, we're gonna heal you, but you gotta give us the Emperor, and you're also gonna become the ruler of the universe. And also, the Emperor has like potentially the power to destroy the Chaos Gods. What? Wow. But maybe like in a way, like maybe they say it because the Emperor is basically the strongest psyker of them all outside of the warp, right? Maybe it's because of that. It's like, okay, it's an ant, but it's the strongest ant, so it's the ant that has the most potential to kill us, so maybe we should just kill that ant right now. Maybe. Or is he like, not an ant, but more of a bear that is like a high chance of murdering you? I don't know.
Horus had always been an immensely skillful military leader. His true genius was in the manipulation of others.
Yeah.
This was often remarked upon by his brother Primarchs, Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists, once noting to Garviel Loken, who you remember was the Lunar Wolves captain and a member of the Mournival, that Horus had Loken put forward a campaign of war so his character would be more well known as a peacemaker than a warmonger. Dawn said, "You understand what Horus had you do this morning? He had primed the Mournival to back him, Loken. He is cultivating the air of a peacemaker, for that plays well across the world to the Imperium. This morning he wanted someone other than himself to suggest unleashing the legions for war." This skill of manipulation would be especially important now. It was one thing for the Chaos Aberrations to turn a few men and even a Primarch, but to turn legions and still more Primarchs, the strongest willed and most loyal of the Emperor's forces to Chaos? How would this be possible? Well, it would in part because Horus did not declare himself outright as a disciple of Chaos, nor would he follow immediately the darkest of their practices.
Big moves, big moves.
As had been the case until now, the game being played was one of subtlety and deception. Horus began implementing throughout the legions the concept of the Mournival, that he had allowed first within the Lunar Wolves. The Mournival Lodge enabled officers to group together in secret and lay the seeds of discontent and mutiny. Horus would also capitalize on the current negative feelings among some of his fellow Primarchs, and then the refracted disillusionment among some of the legions. Lorgar and the Word Bearers had already turned to Chaos following their world-shattering humiliation by the Emperor. Horus would engage legions of Astartes, Imperial troops, and even several Mars Titan legions with the principal concept that Horus now perceived the Emperor powerful as he was, did not deserve the unreserved praise and recognition of the human race. More Astartes legions would now join the traitors, Angron and the World Eaters, Mortarion and his Death Guard, Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children were among the first to side with the War Master.
Yeah.
Others would later fall, including the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Alpha Legion, and lastly, the Thousand Sons.
Yeah, Alpha also. Also Alpha. Who is Alpha? I'm not Alpha. Are you Alpha? I'm not Alpha. You're saying I'm Alpha? You're Alpha. No, you're not Alpha either. Is that guy Alpha? I'm learning. But holy moly. It's very many. It's very many.
It had become clear that the Primarchs were far from the perfect demigod-like human form they were perceived to be. Although technically each Primarch was physically and mentally godlike compared to a standard human, they still bore all of humanity's virtues as well as their flaws such as ego, greed, envy, arrogance, rage, and more besides. These superhuman warriors were meant to be the saviours of mankind, but instead they could be the downfall of everything that had been salvaged and achieved. The Thousand Sons Legion would be a particularly tragic story.
Oh.
Their Primarch Magnus the Red, who you remember had attempted to prevent Horus from falling to darkness whilst experiencing his out-of-body experience to the warp on Davin.
Yeah.
Magnus and the Thousand Sons Legion had begun to use psychic powers and warp sorcery as part of their legion's general practices.
Whoa.
This was actually outlawed by the Emperor, who was cautious of using psychic power in only controlled services.
Yeah.
It's surprising they chose this path to break with Imperial law. However, it seems that they actually bore a natural affinity for such practices, and as with many things, likely started out small before becoming more widespread.
Yeah, it's like I'm just gonna do a little heroin. Okay, maybe we'll do another drug. Cocaine. I'm just gonna do a little cocaine. And then turns out you are now a vacuum cleaner and you're taking all the powder. That is how it turns out, you know. So stay away from drugs, kids. Oh, we need more coffee here. Holy moly. But yeah, it makes sense though. You start just a little bit. You're just like, I'm just testing. I'm just testing this warp technology. No, not warp. This, yeah. Yeah, and then I'm gonna use it a little bit more and a little bit. Oh, it's very useful in this case. And then suddenly everyone is using it, and holy moly, we need to fight this.
In time, many Space Marine legions and chapters would use sanctioned psychers in the new librarian branch of the forces, but in these early days there was no regulation or established command. As a consequence, many of the Thousand Sons Marines would suffer whole body deterioration, as they would eventually become consumed by the warp powers, unable to control or prevent this. It was for this reason that Magnus the Red was able to travel into the warp and see Horus in his most dire of situations. Magnus, after this incident, was so grief-stricken that rather than physically travel to Earth and speak to the Emperor, which now in hindsight would have been the far better choice, he chose to use his psychic power to reach out and speak to the Emperor himself at the Imperial Palace on Terra.
Whoa.
This would shatter all the psychic wards the Emperor had placed on the palace and severely damage the project being secretly worked on by the Emperor.
What?
This itself was connected to the psychic paths of the webway, the gateways used by the Eldar,
oh yeah,
and
the webway,
the old ones. This choice by Magnus was catastrophic and a rash miscalculation. His psychic assault on the Imperial Palace, his panic and frustration and anger and trauma gave free rein to the warp and its evil inhabitants to invade Terra.
No!
Millions of psychers died instantly as their attuned minds were burned out or demons tore them apart. Warp storms consumed entire settlements, shockwaves flattened structures around the world. Having strictly outlawed Magnus's use of sorcery and refusing to believe that Horus, his most trusted son, would betray him, the Emperor concluded wrongly for the traitor to be Magnus and the
No! For real? That is so messed up, man. Oh no! Oh, and also I'm getting so many goosebumps. This is just too hardcore.
Thousand Sons. This error would be yet another travesty of judgment among the many during this whole sorry period.
Wow.
The Emperor ordered Leman Russ and his Space Wolves to engage and destroy Magnus and the Thousand Sons.
No.
But Magnus, now defeated physically and mentally, cast out by his father, they were turned away from the Imperium and into traps to entice them into the darkness of chaos.
Oh no.
Horus was all too aware that there were some Primarchs and Legions too loyalist to ever be persuaded away from the Imperium, such as the Imperial Fists, Ultramarines, Blood and Dark Angels. Horus would instead send these legions far away to the far reaches of the Empire on missions.
You sneaky Horus. Oh my god. He's just like, okay, I'm not gonna get you guys. Bye 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 bye. Bye bye bye. Go out to wherever. And then I'm gonna cook some stew here. Holy shit. Oh, this is so epic and sneaky.
Designed to keep them busy while the traitors would descend on Earth to destroy the Imperium and most critically the Emperor himself. As we outlined earlier, there would now take place many events which would lead some further astray and for the Emperor to become more aware that something was extremely wrong in the Imperium. These can be covered in more detail later. Magnus of the Thousand...
Oh, I just have to say that I feel like I'll do it like this because I want to like I'm so bad with names. I need to learn the names. But the red guys that were like preaching that the Emperor was a god and that was wrong, and then the Emperor came and like reprimanded them by like destroying the city where everyone was worshipping the Emperor and then kneeling in the dust of that city. Like that was like the first like I feel like that was the first like mistake the Emperor did there. But I'm getting like a little bit shook that the Emperor being like so smart and seeing all of these things throughout history, that he reacted this way with Magnus. That Magnus did an error. I see that the error that he did caused a lot of like issues, and that maybe it could be like perceived as an attack, but just going straight for the kill button there seems a little bit drastic, because that is not how you should be as a dad, you know? You need to like, you can't just kill your child or whatever. You gotta like say, that was not right, and then take it easy. And then try to figure out the situation and then sort it out. So I feel like even though your kid does something like really wrong, really wrong, you still need to like try and like understand the situation, be calm. But Emperor Daddy got crazy, and yeah. But I guess it's not a story unless it's a little bit hardcore.
And Sons was, for the Emperor, as far as he was aware, a lone corrupter, distorted by his unlicensed use of the warp. This, of course, was sadly the extreme opposite of the actual situation, but the extreme destruction and loss of life on Earth after it had been contained, as well as the damage to the Emperor's ongoing Gateway project, would be enough to cloud his judgment.
Yeah, cloudy
Horus,
judgment.
Would now move up to expand upon the early seeds of betrayal in the following campaigns of the 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶 system. Horus would order the virus bombing of 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶 3, a planet that had declared itself separate from the Imperium.
Whoa.
Many loyalist marines from traitor legions were actually planetside when Horus and the orbital navy performed exterminatus on the planet, killing all 12 billion inhabitants, including the space marines from multiple legions.
Whoa.
Horus watched from orbit, declaring, "Let the galaxy burn."
Oh, jeez. Oh.
The virus bombs laid waste to the planet, devouring any organic material they encountered, disintegrating humans and seeping into the suits and armor of any Astartes. The storms of the virus raged until the planet was nothing more than a barren desert. The few remaining loyalist space marines would eventually be butchered by their brothers until Horus ordered an orbital bombardment until nothing remained alive on the surface of 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶 3.
That is messed up, man.
Enter Captain Garrow of the 7th Company Death Guard Legion. Nathaniel Garrow is one of my favourite heroes of the Horus Heresy, and perhaps all of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, namely because he was fundamentally responsible for saving the Imperium. His unwavering loyalty and strength of character, which apparently went beyond even some of the Primarchs. He is also a legendary character of the age because of what he would become later after the period of Heresy, but again, that is another story.
Oh, tell me more!
Garrow bore witness to the massacre on 𝗦ci III and was quick to understand the real horror not only of this specific event but what was happening at large. Realising that he would have to escape not only the fleet of the War Master, the sons of Horus, previously the Lunar Wolves, and the Emperor's children, but also his own legion, they would make a warp jump aboard an old fleet ship, the Eisenstein. Without having time to chart its route or destination, this left them then marooned, as well as being subject to multiple attacks from the warp by the dark forces of chaos and the specific deity Nurgle, who had corrupted and mutated his own Death Guard legion.
Wow.
Despite all this, they survived and proceeded to detonate their ship's core in the vain hope of attracting a ship to come and rescue them. Luckily for the crew, they succeeded, and the vessel approaching turned out to be an Imperial Fist's Astartes barge containing none other than the Primarch Rogol Dawn himself.
Wow.
Trying to convince Dawn of Horus and the other legion's betrayal, though, was a near impossible task. The suggestion sent him into such a fit of rage he nearly executed Garrow on the spot, and would have been doomed to failure were it not for the Remembrancers. The Remembrancers were an order of historians, journalists and civilians from Earth at the time who were sent along with the expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade. Their function was to chronicle deeds, events and generally record the history so that we could then hold that for the future Imperium of man. Remembrancers were generally seen as very reliable sources of information, especially those who had any psychic capabilities, if they were psychers, and could actually record information simply by visualizing that, by seeing it. And when Rogol Dawn could actually see the events that had unfolded, he had no choice but to accept them.
Oh, I see. Like, at first I thought that, okay, they got to this ship, and then these, like, journalists were there, and they saw them fighting, and I thought that the journalists recorded them fighting about this issue was going to turn into, like, the journalist talking to the Emperor, or not directly, but, like, indirectly, or sending a message, or something like that. But it wasn't like that. It was like the journalist that had been on the journey with them, and they have managed to, like, get this journalist through all of this horror, getting through the warp, killing all of these Nurgles, and then showing this guy, like, the recordings. Wow.
Returning to Terra, Dawn would speak to the Emperor, and finally the betrayal and heresy would come into the light.
Wow.
Garrow, though, in immense frustration, despite all his efforts, was not able to speak to the Emperor himself, but was stationed on the lunar colony along with the remaining loyalist Death Guard and Imperial Navy crew
just too angry.
The Eisenstein. The Imperial forces on Earth considered their presence too dangerous to allow them to roam freely. 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 had now extinguished the last shreds of loyalty from the 3 legions under his command, who were now complete in their misguided transition to chaos.
He's
his
efficient.
Next target in the campaign was 𝗦ci_5. Here, he would establish a command post and reinforce his position. The Emperor, now in a fit of despair and rage at the actions of Horus, commanded 7 legions of Astartes to attack and subdue the traitors, and subsequently return them to Terra to face their actions. However, unbeknownst to the Emperor, at least half of these legions had already been deceived and strayed from loyalty to the Imperium. They had not yet made their stance clear, but represented a dangerous deception to the Imperium.
Yeah, that is sneaky. It's like, you go out there and you take Horus, and then you didn't know that you talked to someone that was on Horus's team. That is a little bit screwed.
Ooh. The first wave of attacks to 𝗦ci_5 were carried out by the Loyalist legions, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, and the Iron Hands. Horus had already been passed information of their landing sites, and this would cost them horrific losses at this initial contact. Worse would come though. The 4 remaining legions to attack were no longer loyal to the Imperium. The Night Lords, Word Bearers, Iron Warriors and Alpha Legion descended to attack in a brutal combined assault, slaughtering the remnants of the 3 Imperial legions.
Whoa.
This event would be known from here on as the 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 drop site massacre.
Oh my god.
Things looked dark for the Imperium. The strongest legions were still tasked to the fringes of the galaxy, and there seemed little to stand between Horus and his now 7-strong fleet of Astartes legions. Not to mention the further forces of corrupted Imperial Navy, the victorious 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀, who were fighting the Schism of Mars, the civil war between factions on Mars loyal to the Imperium and Horus, and now successfully they had won their campaign there. The traitor legions on Horus would assault and destroy many loyal Imperial bastions as they travelled towards Terra, taking years to do so in the process.
Whoa.
By now, the War Master had amassed a massive army comprising multiple groups including Titans, Astartes and advanced war gear, corrupted Imperial forces and even cultists from worlds who could spread discord and disrupt Imperial worlds through terrorism or cult activity.
Wow.
The Word Bearer...
Yeah, it's like go wild, people. Just do whatever you want to do as long as it's horrible. Oh my god.
Especially revelled in this, often finding that their worlds, previously they converted to the divinity of the Emperor, were more than willing, within a fairly short space of time, to worship them again as gods or angels, and were a great asset to factor into their battle tactics, and use where appropriate these expendable, gullible souls to support their forces.
Aye, aye, aye.
Fortunately for the Imperium, one thing was slowing down Horus and his legions: logistics. Despite acquiring a massive force, Horus found he was unable to move it efficiently around given the limitations of the warp vessels in his fleet, and this did buy the loyalist side some time. There is one other unmentioned force Horus found available to him, that of the warp demons themselves. However, interestingly at this time, despite many Space Marine legions pledging themselves to Horus and to Chaos, they still viewed these creatures as dangerous warp phenomena and opposite to their principles. This shows that at the time it's believable that many of the Space Marines aligned to Horus were perhaps not entirely aware of what it was they were signing up for, and had perceived this more as a political rebellion to impose a new order to the Imperium, rather than the truth of the matter, which was that they were in fact surrendering it to a true fall into a hellish reality and a foul darkness that later awaited them all. This would also be in part down to the previous decisions to instigate a rule of ignorance over such matters, meaning many Astartes warriors genuinely had no real knowledge of what Chaos was or what it represented. Although I've heard that before, that it was like a thing where they tried not to inform everybody about Chaos, because then Chaos would maybe grow stronger of the fear and all of these things. So it makes sense that a lot of these like rebellion people just thought it was like, no, we can't follow the Emperor anymore, Horus is better or Horus is right or whatever. Oof. Though it has to be said that this was rapidly changing and faster among some legions than others. Matters overall were made worse by the sheer amount of confusion reigning at this time. The warp had been disturbed, making warp travel again difficult. As outlined, this was both a positive and a negative for both sides concerned. It also made communication difficult, meaning some worlds could not be warned, and meant that many did not know the truth of the matter or who indeed they could trust. Rogal Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, had been stationed on Terra for some years now after his return with Nathaniel Garrow, and barely rested in his activities to prepare an insurmountable defence of Terra.
Wow.
However, his task was made all the more difficult by the warp storms, which prevented ease of reinforcement as well as communication. In addition, Mars now failed to repel the 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 and had fallen to the War Master's forces, and as such had to be continually blockaded and prevented from launching its own attacks to Earth. As far as the Emperor, Malkador and Imperial Fists were concerned, the spearhead on 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹 had been a catastrophic failure.
Yeah.
Other legions, such as the Ultramarines, were now completely isolated and out of contact, and so they could do nothing but watch the galaxy burn around them, as Horus himself had stated he would as he oversaw the virus bombing of Isfahan III. Despite this period often being documented as clear-cut death guard against blood angels and so on, it was far more chaotic than this. Although battles and confrontations would occur, it was not as simple as the War Master declaring, X Legion is now under my command. A legion comprised thousands of Space Marines, and they would rarely be all stationed in one location at once. Consequently, this fragmentation meant many could return from stationing elsewhere to find to their horror the truth of the matter. As outlined previously, although Space Marines can often appear to be mechanical machines of war, they are just as complex as any human in their thoughts, decisions and moralities. Hence, why Horus saw it necessary to slaughter so many loyalists from the legions he would call his own on Isfahan III.
Yeah. Because, okay, you've been out there, coming back, and holy shit, we're on the other side now. And then some people will probably say, I'm not down with that. This is a little bit too fucked up. Damn.
This meant that many smaller groups of Marines, when returning to communication with their legion, would either meet a bloody fate at the hands of their brothers should they refuse to convert to the War Master's cause, or instead they would flee to form fragmented groups of rare Marines known as Black Shields. Now, just to diverge very quickly, Black Shields are a rare form of Astartes who have fully severed themselves from their parent legion or chapter, but who still remain loyal to the Imperium.
Wow.
In this early time, however, only some of the Marines would obscure their shoulder plates. Others would wear their legion colours and heraldry, proudly believing themselves to be the purest warriors, uncorrupted by the darkness and the last remnants of their previous but now ruined glory.
Wow.
Later in time, though, all these rogue Astartes would black out their armour to remain anonymous, as their legion loyalty became a deep shame and irrelevant to their personal missions.
Damn.
Black Shield Space Marines would later become the fabled Death Watch Marines, who dedicate themselves to endlessly battling Xenos using unorthodox methods and allying with fellow Black Shields whose prior legion heritage is irrelevant and often best unspoken of. It is uncommon for the Black Shield to reveal more than bare details other than his name, basic training experiences and so on. They fight in the name of the Imperium but remain in a state of self-imposed exile.
Yeah.
The Death Watch Black Shield Marines would also fight in a manner divergent to normal Marines. They will willingly sacrifice themselves where necessary or take on objectives that others would consider a death sentence.
Yeah.
In many ways, their lives seem to be a form of penance, carrying the shame and weight of sin thrown down by their legions upon their shoulders, but all the while remaining staunchly loyal to the Emperor.
This sounds a lot like the Death Corps of Krieg. Those people. Sounds a lot like them. Wow. But it's not them, I know. But it sounds a lot like them when it comes to like the, being willing to do anything. And also the shame.
Horus continued his unending campaign of betrayal now, in a bizarre parody of the Imperial Crusade. Each world over which the War Master's shadow fell, a simple choice was given: total submission and surrender, or total destruction and a lifetime of slavery, and ultimately a miserable death.
Wow. I have a feeling that going like throughout the universe the first time under the banner of the Emperor, they were trying to like find diplomatic solutions. They were like being a little bit more gentle maybe, but they were also having like a very strong mission, so they had to submit. But now going through them again is probably like making it very easy and very clear. It's like you either with us or you're without us, and just like bam, you're dead or something. So it's probably easier the second time around with less restrictions of being a good guy-ish.
This campaign was also certainly one of fear-mongering and compliance for sibling worlds in a given system. For any world marked for destruction and genocide was never fully extinguished in this manner. It would conveniently allow those survivors who had not simply lost their minds from witnessing the horrors unleashed by the Dark Astartes could convey their experience to other neighbouring worlds, and thereby assuring their near immediate surrender to the War Master's fleet.
Sneaky.
In this sense, these near total annihilation attacks on planets by the War Master were not true exterminatus as was seen on Isstvan III, rather they were a clever and brutal propaganda tool to yet again demonstrate Horus's adept ability in the art of war he had perfected through the years of the Imperial Crusades.
Wow.
By now, some 9 of the 20 Space Marine legions were under the command of Horus. An interesting but specifically relevant aside to this is to mention the 2nd and 11th Space Marine legions. They would have all records of their existence destroyed, and no history or explanation given as to their origin, actions, or fate. The complete and utter erasure of all records of the 2nd and 11th legions is considered by Imperial historians as the most successful edict of obliteration ever carried out. However, fragments of information do exist through quoted literature or documents, and it seems that these 2 legions' records were eradicated prior to the Horus Heresy. We have no way of knowing for sure what happened to the erased 2 legions, but it seems likely they were precursors to the events of the Heresy. The Primarch of the Space Wolves, Leman Russ, is recorded as stating that Space Marines had been previously tasked with fighting one another when speaking to Caspar Horsaw, who questioned him. The unprecedented? Like Astartes fighting Astartes? Like the rout being called to sanction another legion? That? No. That is not unprecedented.
Whoa.
This gives credence to the possibility that the Space Wolves are the Emperor's preferred execution legion, as they would be later tasked with the destruction of the Thousand Sons and Magnus the Red. Another quote stated that the wolves will be loosed again. This small fragment suggests...
So the 2nd Legion and the other one, I don't remember which number that was, but the 2nd is like very clear to me. So they have previously been slaughtered and removed, erased by maybe the Emperor by using the wolves. Is that... I'm starting to understand a little bit more.
It is not the first time they'd faced such a mission.
Aye.
𝗦cie the Sigillite and Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists would also shed some fragmented light on this history. 𝗦cie would say, Horus has 3 of his brother legions with him. You have your fists and 13 others. Would that it were 15, mused Dawn. Do not even think it, my friend, warned 𝗦cie. They are lost to us forever. I know, said Dawn.
Whoa.
A conversation between Primarch Rogel Dawn and 𝗦cie the Sigillite, and this leads us to speculate that a great darkness caused them to be lost prior to Heresy. But the most telling of all would be part of Horus's vision during his out-of-body experience on Davin, where he would have, among other delusions, a reminiscence back in time to the DNA laboratories of the Emperor. We know that the warp creatures had originally scattered the Primarchs, so it seems entirely likely that this vision was at least in part accurate. Horus would describe that. He stopped by the tank with 11 stenciled upon it. The 11th Primarch, feeling the untapped glories that might have lain ahead for what grew within, but knowing that they would never come to pass. This could suggest that Chaos wanted to demonstrate to Horus that he was not the first to be corrupted, and that where previously they had failed and subsequently were destroyed by the Emperor, he would succeed.
Whoa.
These glimpses are interesting, but do beg the question, if such a fate had befallen the 2nd and 11th legions, why was the Emperor not more cautious to allow such darkness to encroach and infect his Astartes again? On the other hand, perhaps it was precisely these earlier corruptions which led the Emperor to his course of outlawing knowledge of chaos, the old adage of what you don't know can't hurt you. Additionally, perhaps the fact that if indeed these 2 now erased legions were corrupted and then crushed by the Space Wolves, could this have lulled the Emperor into a false sense of security, believing any further corruptions to be also surmountable? We could speculate that the...
yeah, that could be. That is like, I dealt with it before, I can deal with it again. He's busy. Maybe that is what he's thinking. Maybe not. Maybe. Interesting theories, and I'm starting to understand like that it's not clear cut what happened to the missing legions, but there are theories, and I'm intrigued.
The Chaos Gods perhaps even allowed these legions to be destroyed prior to the Horus Heresy so as to deliberately misdirect the Emperor into believing them to be weaker or less capable of force than they actually were. There is no definitive answer, this is all supposition, but the possibilities and
I know about one Chaos God that can play such games.
ramifications are particularly intriguing. Whatever the reasons for these prior events and the consequences they would carry, one thing was now certain. Horus's fleet seemed unstoppable as it approached Terra. Rogel Dawn and Malkador the Sigillite were receiving the fragmented survivors from the Isfahan 5 massacre at this time and begun to realise the grim reality of what they were facing. They hurriedly attempted to contact the Space Wolves and White Scars, who as they were about to return to Terra were now engaged by the traitors of the Alpha Legion. This made retreat difficult, but the White Scars were able to break free to return to Terra, with the Wolves vowing to follow them on once they had eradicated the Alpha Legion's force.
Wow.
The Ultramarines similarly had been engaged on the planet of Calth against the Wordbearers. Robert Guilliman and the Ultramarines received reinforcements from their vast legion to form one of the greatest forces in the Imperium now left standing, and they would repel the shattered Wordbearers and set course for Terra after receiving their communication from Malkador.
Wow.
However, Guilliman realised all too well they would likely arrive too late to make a significant difference, as had been Horus's original intention on posting them as far from Earth as was possible without it raising suspicion.
Wow.
Now the race was really on, as nearly all the Space Marine legions, loyalist and traitor alike, headed for Holy Terror to determine the final battle for supremacy of the galaxy.
Oh my god.
Despite all their best efforts, only the White Scars, Blood Angels and Imperial Fists were able to reach Terra before the traitor legions arrived. The loyalists were also supported with 3 Mechanicus Titan legions and millions of Imperial Guard soldiers. Their objective was less to defeat the traitors, that task was not in anybody's mind. Their sole task was simple and twofold. They must protect the Emperor at all costs, and they must survive long enough for reinforcements from the remaining loyalist legions who were still en route to Terra.
Wow. Oh, the Battle of Terra. Oh, this is so epic. Oh, I'm scared now, but I'm also hyped. I'm a little bit of both.
The Battle of Terra began as expected, with mass orbital bombardments from both the surface to orbit and vice versa. Luna, the Imperial Naval Station, also launched massive attacks with its huge orbital defense system, which sustained the traitors with heavy losses, but sadly not heavy enough to make any significant impact. Horus would destroy first the lunar defences and then the ground defence systems on Earth. It was now open to attack. The first drop pods landed on Terra, carrying the corrupted hellish Chaos Marines who battled the Loyalists for every step of ground they took. In securing the docking ports planetside, the traitors were able to reinforce with thousands more Marines along with the corrupted Dark Mechanicum Titans. Cultists also practiced their invocations, which brought demons large and small out from the warp and into reality, unleashing their horrors on the Loyalists, both Astartes and Imperial Guard alike. The forces of Chaos assaulted the Imperial Palace relentlessly, some being led on by the Primarch, now turned demon Prince Angron of the World Eaters.
Oh, the World Eaters were, yeah. But the Primarch himself, Angros, was attacking. Oh, the place, the palace.
But each time they attacked, the Blood Angels, led by their Primarch Sanguinius, would repel them.
Wow.
The White Scars Legion attempted to draw the Dark Forces away from the palace, but each time would be forced into submission, retreating back into the relative shelter of the palaces.
This is wild.
Horus, frustrated at this point, and all too aware he was running out of time, ordered one of the Titan legions to demolish entire sections of the Imperial Wall. Despite grievous losses, the Titans, led by the infamous Imperator-class battle titan 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶, smashed breaches in the Imperial Palace's defences, which the traitors then flooded through.
Oh, damn!
𝗦cie Khan, Primarch of the White Scars, decided at this time on a change in tactic. Instead of trying to repel the seemingly endless forces of Chaos Marines, he swept a lightning raid to the Lion's Gate spaceport, catching the traitors at the port completely off guard.
Whoa.
They were able to secure it quickly and reactivate the orbital defences, which began immediately destroying all descending traitor drop pods and landing transports.
Wow!
In a single action,
Smart.
they had cut the reinforcements of the traitors in half and dealt a substantial blow.
Wow.
They also tried to secure the second main port known as the Eternity Wall, but were unsuccessful as the Chaos Forces had now reinforced their positions. The battle at the main palace was not going well now either, and the Loyalists had been pushed back to the Eternity Gate, the sole point of entry into the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace.
Oh no, they're so
The
close.
Marines, the Blood Angels and Imperial Fists were to hold back the attacking Chaos Forces, while the remaining Loyalists made it through the gate to safety. 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀, the Blood Angels Primarch, would now face a terrifying prospect as he flew against a greater demon of Khorne, clashing together head-on as they battled in the air, flying above the mortal forces in a ferocious and blurring battle of godlike ability.
That is epic. Oh my god, and we're so close here now. It's so close. Ooh.
𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗃 would ultimately be victorious, breaking the demonic creature and throwing its shattered body to the howling heretics below.
Oh.
The Warp
Wow.
Gate project the Emperor had secretly been working on resided.
Like, oh, I'm so sorry for pausing in the middle of like very epic moments here, but one thing that puzzled me a little bit with this is that we have this like the palace and the basically the castle, the palace, and how they're like all of this shooting down on Earth and all of these troops being sent in, and then you have like space, you have so many things, but still we're at this like siege the city kind of from the ground thing where we have to get through the different gates. I just, in my mind, I'm thinking like drop pods or whatever, just straight into the palace. But there's probably a reason. There's probably like, no, because of the X, Y, and Z. Or maybe a bubble or a shield or something. But I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit strange with like the epic space battles, and then you can't get into the palace, you know, faster. But it's many reasons probably.
In this chamber, and it now risked becoming their undoing. Initially, it required only a small portion of the Emperor's psychic attention, but after the damage wrought by Magnus of the Thousand Suns in attempting to reach the Emperor, it subsequently was damaged so badly that it required a significantly higher proportion of the Emperor's powers to keep it closed. Combined with the fact that the forces of chaos were fighting to use this portal, it became an immense burden to maintain it safely.
Wow.
The Emperor now called on 𝗦cie𝗰𝗋 the Sigillite, informing him that he was required to take his place on the psychic amplifier known as the Golden Throne.
Wow, this guy is now gonna sit on the Golden Throne. And also, I totally forgot about the Corpse Emperor, how we're getting there. Oh, I'm so scared.
This provided the psychic shielding needed to protect the new human-built sections of the webway, which had been the Emperor's secret project and was intended to be the final gift to humanity before the Horus Heresy had begun. The Emperor's original choice of his replacement on the artifact had been Magnus the Red, but now 𝗦cie𝗰𝗋 was the only legitimate successor, being one of the few human remaining psykers with enough strength to carry out the duty. In the final days of the siege, the Emperor ordered 𝗦cie𝗰𝗋 to summon 12 men of character, skill, and determination. These would be tested and trained to become an elite group of investigators intended to root out treachery across the Imperium and in the centuries to come to prevent any event like the Horus Heresy from occurring again.
Wow! The Inquisition got like born here now in this. Wow!
This would become the earliest stirrings of the Inquisition and also later the highly secretive chapter known as the Grey Knights.
Wow.
The Emperor also told 𝗦ci𝗰 to steel himself, as he would need to prepare to make an unbearable sacrifice.
Oh no.
𝗦ci𝗰 would return from his mission to recruit the foundation of the Inquisition. Using his powerful psychic subterfuge, 𝗦ci𝗰 and his new recruits were able to pass unscathed through the battle lines and come before the Emperor within the inner gates of the Imperial Palace.
Oh.
𝗦ci𝗰 brought before the Emperor his 12 men to be judged for their suitability. And the
This is so cool. I'm just like goosebumps all over my body, and I cannot wait for what's gonna happen next and next and next and next.
Emperor saw that 𝗦ci𝗰 had chosen wisely. Of the 12, 4 were mortal lords and administrators of the Imperium, possessing an inquisitive nature and unyielding strength of mind. The other 8 were Space Marines, whose abilities were as peerless as their dedication to the Emperor. Some Marines were from legions that had abandoned the Emperor in favour of Horus's dark promises, but these battle brothers had never lost their staunch loyalty and had fought the Heresy from within in many ways, and they were the truest expression of the Imperium and carried an even stronger will than their Lord Primarchs.
Wow.
𝗦ci𝗰 the Sigillite ascended to the Golden Throne, replacing the Emperor who stood before his loyal captains, 𝗦ci𝗰 of the Imperial Fists and 𝗦ci𝗰𝗋 of the Blood Angels. 𝗦ci𝗰 could no longer physically speak, his mind consumed by the concentration he had to bring to bear in order to control the tempest of psychic forces consuming him.
Wow.
The Emperor directed the attention of the 2 Primarchs, the demigods of mankind, to look upon this mere mortal. 𝗦ci𝗰, a powerful psyker, but not an Astartes, not a Primarch, just a man. The Emperor declared to them, "Behold, the greatest sacrifice of our age. 𝗦ci𝗰 the Sigillite is no more. Henceforth he shall always and only ever be 𝗦ci𝗰 the hero." 𝗦ci𝗰 would only be able to withstand the psychic assault on him for a few hours. Powerful as he was but a fraction of the power of the Emperor, and his body, mind and soul would be consumed in a matter of hours.
What?
𝗦ci𝗰 the Sigillite was a true hero of humanity, saving it from total destruction on numerous occasions, ultimately sacrificing himself for the will of his friend, the Emperor.
Wow.
After 55 days, the Siege of Terror had kept the enemy at the gates, but only just. Both sides knew the defeat of the Imperium was near, and all that was required was the defence or destruction of the Eternity Gate. Horus, knowing this, and that he must complete the siege before the arrival of the Loyalist reinforcements from the other Space Marine legions, prepared to teleport to the surface from his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, to lead this final assault in person. The Wordbearer's first chaplain and prime traitor Erebus broke the news to Horus that their demonic allies in the Warp had informed them the Dark Angels and Space Wolf legions were now nearing Terra, and the vast force of Ultramarines were only a short distance away by now.
Wow.
Hearing this news, Horus despaired. All seemed lost. He needed more time to break the most secure enclave of the Imperial Palace, and the massive Imperial reinforcements were only hours away. Horus decided on a dangerous gamble. Dropping the shields of his flagship, he opened the gateway for the Loyalists to board his vessel. The Emperor would not waste this opportunity and teleported aboard the Vengeful Spirit with his elite personal guard, the Legio Custodes. The Primarch 𝗦ci𝗰𝗋 and 𝗦ci𝗰 several companies of Imperial Fists and Blood Angels veteran Marines in the assault. Finding themselves though scattered now throughout the ship, they fought a series of close-quarter battles against hardened Chaos Marines to reach the bridge of the ship and Horus. 𝗦ci𝗰𝗋, the Blood Angels Primarch, reached his brother Horus first, and the War Master attempted to turn his previously oldest and closest friend among the other Primarchs to Chaos one last time. When 𝗦ci𝗰𝗋 refused to be corrupted, Horus attacked. Wounded from his many battles on Terra and the battle with the Greater Demon, 𝗦ci𝗰𝗋 proved to be easily no match for Horus, who was now at the peak of his demonic power, bearing multiple marks of chaos. Horus strangled to death the angel with cruel ease.
Whoa.
An alternate version of this event recorded in the Imperial records has 𝗦ci𝗰𝗋 cutting a small hole in Horus's Terminator armour before he died. This chink in the armour would aid in the Emperor's battle against Horus.
Wow.
When the Emperor entered the bridge, he saw the winged corpse of the angelic 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 lying at Horus's feet.
Oh, what a view. Oh my god.
Horus engaged the Emperor, calling him foolish for refusing the power that Chaos offered. Horus proclaimed that if the Emperor would kneel before him, he would spare his life. The Emperor knew well the ancient trap that had snared Horus. And the Emperor told the corrupted Primarch that he was the deluded slave of Chaos, not its master, for no mortal could ever truly claim to be more than a simple pawn of the ruinous powers.
Tossing some...
Snarling with frustration, Horus hurled bolts of demonic lightning at the Emperor, who nullified them before they touched him. The Emperor and Horus would engage one another in the throne room of the massive battle barge, a combat of both physical skill and psychic force in nature. The Emperor was unquestionably the most skilled and powerful warrior, but his love for his sons could not bring himself to bear his full strength against Horus,
Oh no!
his first son.
Yeah.
The Emperor would deflect multiple barrages with his lightning claw, but Horus was possessed, relentless, and sliced open the Emperor's chest armor. He then proceeded to sever the tendons in the right wrist, disarming the Emperor. An enraged psychic blast from the War Master seared the flesh from the Emperor's face, destroying one of his eyes, tearing the broken Emperor's right arm from his socket. Horus raised his father's broken ragdoll body high over his head to throw him down, breaking his body. The vicious and casual brutality of the War Master's act galvanized the now broken Emperor as he awoke to what awaited mankind under the rule of Horus and the Chaos Gods. Realizing at last that his favored son was wholly lost to the corruption of Chaos, the Emperor gathered his full psychic power, bringing it through his body and into the Imperium, unleashing a lance of pure energy that pierced the gloating Horus's psychic defenses. The Emperor, in a white-hot rage, pierced his very being with psychic power.
Whoa.
Before Horus died, the Chaos powers would abandon him. And as he looked his father in the eye, shedding a single tear, realizing his unforgivable betrayal, begging his father to forgive him. The Emperor saw regret in his fallen son's eyes, but the Emperor also knew that the Dark Gods could attempt to possess Horus again, and that this time he would not be there to stop them if they did. Forcing all compassion from his mind for the sake of humanity, the Emperor tore his soul apart, not banishing or casting it to some dark realm, but erasing it from reality, destroying Horus utterly. His essence burned from existence in both the physical world and the Imperium, so that Chaos could not resurrect Horus, their claim on his soul a bitter blow to the Dark Gods, who would scream a terrible psychic scream in their rage and frustration. The destruction of Horus's soul sent a psychic shockwave surging across the solar system, casting the demons of chaos back into the warp, and spreading a mass panic among the traitor legions and other traitor forces on the surface of Terra, who felt in fractions of seconds the weakening power and loss of the chaos mark upon them. It became clear to the traitors that...
Holy moly. This is just so epic, I don't have words. I'm just in utter shock. I didn't even know Horus was dead. What the hell? Oh, the epicness is just too epic. And the power of the Emperor is just so insane. Like, his body was basically just mangled and there was not much left there. But he still had this insane psychic ability that just like... Shaboof! Oh... And he erased Horus's soul. He didn't just kill him, he erased him. That is next level. Oh.
Their leader had been defeated. In this moment, a terrible berserker fury, later to become known as the Black Rage, encompassed the Blood Angels. From the moment of their Primarch 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 death, they went out surging forth to scatter the attackers, slashing in all directions, howling vengeance upon them. The already retreating traitor legions ran for their lives, screaming in terror from the frenzied Blood Angels. A screaming retreat soon turned to an apocalyptic bloodbath.
Whoa.
Thousands upon thousands of Chaos Space Marines, as well as the Chaos Titans, fell attempting to flee, any who fell behind were obliterated by the Blood Angels. Many of them would be later found still wandering around in an insane rage, smashing the broken Chaos Space Marines to pieces with apparently little conscience, thought or control. The ground before the Imperial palaces was now awash with blood of traitors and heretics.
Ooh.
Meanwhile, the Imperial Fist's Primarch Rogel Dawn finally found his way to the corrupted Starship's bridge, only to discover his brother Sanguinius and the shattered and broken body of the Emperor, who was now, despite his near immortal powers, on the very real verge of death. His remaining psychic energy spent in the defense of the Golden Throne and subsequent battle with Horus. The Emperor whispered instructions to Dawn, ordering him to transport him to the device known as the Golden Throne in the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace. If there was any chance to save the Emperor's life, Dawn would of course do so, without question.
Yeah.
Returning to the Golden Throne Room deep in the Imperial Palace, Dawn and the frail body of the Emperor arrived just as 𝗦cie was beginning to fail. His body had been consumed by the immeasurably powerful psychic storms that were now visibly lashing his body. As the tech priest...
Yeah, like when the Emperor just erased Horus, and he was sitting here on the throne trying to keep it all together, it makes sense that the storms would be like a big, like huge right now.
Hastily adapted the throne to be able to support the Emperor, 𝗦cie was disconnected. Within minutes of this, though, his husk of a body would turn to dust, rolling across the stone floor. But not before he reached out with the very last of his life energy and transferred it to the Emperor, giving him that last injection of power needed to survive for the moments until he could be transferred to the Golden Throne.
Wow.
This last act of 𝗦cie was another blessing from the Sigillite, as the Imperial attendants would come to the realization that they could do this many times over, and so began the almost endless task of locating and bringing Psykers to Holy Terror to have the honor of being sacrificed and transferred their energy to the Emperor to keep his spirit alive and also to keep the door of the raging Imperial webway shut.
Wow. So yeah, I've been getting some mixed like signals on why they were like killing these Psykers to like fuel the Emperor. Like I think some people have been saying that it isn't to fuel the Emperor, it's to fuel the device. But some are saying, and I feel like he is saying that it is to give the Emperor the life, so he can like keep on and keep on and keep on.
This last energy from 𝗦cie would allow the Emperor to speak his final commands, to continue the fight to free humanity from the forces of chaos, as well as the ignorance that continued to assail it. With these final words, he would be silent, his body now entombed within the mechanisms of the Golden Throne, his body shattered, but his spirit remaining forever strong.
Wow.
He would command the Imperium through his psychic hints and emanations, interpreted and carried out by the High Lords of Terror. Far from a broken shell, the Emperor would continue to support the Imperium, protecting them by shielding the webway, keeping the beacon of light, the Astronomicon used by Imperial navigators, shining in the darkness, and some say the Emperor still now battles the forces of chaos on their own plane of existence, keeping the worst and most insidious demons from entering the material world or infecting the minds of suggestible men.
Wow.
Humanity had survived the darkest time, but at what cost? Hundreds of worlds stood destroyed or still now infected by the insanity of chaos. Half the Imperial forces had turned traitor and now began to retreat into the dark depths of the galaxy or the Eye of Terror itself.
Wow.
Many previously prosperous worlds were now considered unsavable, and consequently Imperial fleets would arrive to perform exterminatus on these damned worlds, destroying all life on the planet, reducing it to an orbiting rock. The Imperium itself, despite the Emperor's best wishes, would struggle to maintain the sense of bright order once enjoyed during the Crusades. Now it would enter a difficult period, in many ways not too far removed from the 21st century, where states of repression and ignorance were often widespread and caused many of the problems they would face. The Imperium operated on a new level of suppression of its citizens, and in many ways it's hard to really find fault with this rationale. Given the severe blow to their military power, the Lords of Terror and remaining Primarchs needed to hold everything together amidst a crumbling empire. A still angry and battling traitor force who were still present throughout the galaxy and Imperial systems. Worse still was that the Xenos forces such as the Orc, Eldar and later Tyranids would seize on this opportunity to exploit humanity in its weakened state and would descend to ravage Imperial worlds that were unable to be successfully defended during this time.
Wow, it makes sense. It's a difficult time right now. Oh, everything is like broken. Oh, whoa.
Despite all this, the Imperium of Man would stand strong, and whilst far from the perfect empire the Emperor had sought to create, it would still represent humanity's best hope for survival. They were not cut off and isolated as they had been during the Age of Strife, and in some respects would regain much of their strength in the coming 10,000 years.
Chapter 9, the Great Scouring and Reformation. Okay. Wow. It's like humanity goes so far, gets pulled back, goes so far, gets pulled back. That is how it's gonna be, I guess. Wow.
Now at the end of the Horus Heresy, the Imperium of Man was far from what you would call secure. But it had taken back control of the offensive and the traitor legions. These were now fleeing with gathering haste from the territories of mankind. The primary source of strength for the Imperium now lay with the Ultramarines Legion. They were in a relatively unique position of having unintentionally suffered very little damage from the Heresy, being ordered to a posting far from the activities of Horus and his traitor fleet. Arriving too late to have any real impact on the final battles of Terra, Robert Guilliman found to his horror and frustration that the Emperor had already been wounded beyond repair and uncountable swathes of Marines killed in defense of the Imperial palaces. The Loyalist legions had suffered immense casualties, be it on Isfahan, Terra, or any of the myriad engagements between, and that is to speak nothing of the appalling losses suffered by the millions of Imperial Guard and Mechanicum, in addition to the many worlds that were totally lost or also destroyed at this point. One saving grace for the Imperium was that the Ultramarines had been excluded from the campaign due to...
Yeah, that they are ready now to do everything that needs to be done. But it must be like an insane, like psychologically, psychological... It must be a huge hit to your psyche, coming back and seeing your Emperor like that, and knowing that you didn't make it in time. And you're probably gonna wear that pain forever now. Oh.
Their significantly larger size than most other legions. Horus feared the Ultramarines especially, as they were some of the most tactically able, the most uncorruptible, and most importantly, their overwhelming weight of numbers. Many legions in the time of the Crusade recruited from the territories that they marshalled. The Ultramarines, through sheer fortune, had gathered a force of somewhere in the region of 250,000 Space Marines, compared to a more average 100,000 of the other strongest legions in this period. Although size could vary from anything like 50 to 150,000, the size of a legion was determined often by external factors, and there were no strict rules about its limitations. It was more a case of the number of incoming new recruits, the inevitable battle losses, the availability of potential recruits, and the administrative skills of the Primarch and his officers. Guilliman was a great organizer and always pragmatic in his approach. Also, by coincidence, the system in which the Ultramarines were situated happened to have an especially plentiful supply of suitable new recruits, who were excellent stock for genetic adaptation into Astartes. The size of the Ultramarines was particularly important at this time, as the traitor legions had themselves suffered massive losses and were now without their primary leader, Horus. Disorganized, fearful, and in some cases overcome with guilt and regret. This disorganization enabled Guilliman to capitalize on the situation, spreading his Ultramarine force far and wide across the Imperium, enabling the other Loyalist legions to consolidate their forces and in some cases restock from any new recruits who were already in the program of conversion to full Astartes. They were speeded through their training. The traitors, on the other hand, had little opportunity for this, as the Ultramarines would block any attempt they would make to try and secure supplies or new recruits for their damaged legions. Not to mention being continually harassed and assaulted by the Black Guard Death Watch, fighting now with renewed vigor.
It makes sense. It seems very dark here for Horus's boys.
Some sought supreme vengeance for, as they saw it, the destruction of their once proud legions, and moreover the beloved emperor himself. They wasted no time in immediately executing any corrupted traitors they found, and would assist planets in crushing human cultists where they sprang forth.
Yeah.
The newly established Inquisition, at the command of the Emperor prior to his battle with Horus, enabled the Imperium to have a fully established force to keep a watchful eye over any signs of taint of chaos, with the same caution and paranoia that the Interrex civilization had approached it with many years during the negotiations of Horus and the Lunar Wolves.
Yeah.
This Inquisition would later be supported by the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights are a highly secretive wing of the Imperial Space Marine forces dedicated to the sole task of locating and eliminating the taint of dark corruption and battling the Imperium's most lethal and foul enemies. This period now would become known as the Great Scouring, and the Ultramarines, along with the other recovering Loyalist legions, would carry out the Emperor's last passing words to the letter. Although many traitor marines fled in disarray, it became apparent in the years to come that some had established defensive bastions on distant worlds. It would take decades to cause enough damage to the legions of the Night Lords, the Alpha Legion and the Iron Warriors before they too would retreat to the abhorrent safety of the Eye of Terror.
Wow.
After this period of cleansing, the Imperium needed to take stock of its situation and plan for the future. This period would be referred to as the Reformation. The Dark Forces had for the most part been vanquished, but the problem facing the Loyalists now was how to proceed. A plan was required before they could attend the task at hand, namely rebuilding, expanding and protecting the Imperial Empire. Roboute had firmly taken a leading command in these matters, and it would be he who provided the blueprints for the Imperial forces for the next 10 millennia.
Wow.
As Roboute saw it, the main cause of the heresy was less emotional than some of his brothers would have you believe. Mankind would always be unstable, and this instability needed to be accounted for. Therefore, placing a legion of Space Marines in the hands of one man, no matter how godlike that man was, could inevitably lead to problems.
Yeah.
The War Master had been able to command many legions, each comprising hundreds of thousands of superhuman warriors. 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 saw that this was a dangerous position to allow anyone other than the Emperor himself to hold, knowing the truth now that Primarchs were just as susceptible to persuasion as a mortal human. It would be irresponsible to allow the existing structure of the Astartes legions to continue. 𝗦ci𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀.
Yeah, here is like where he like breaks it down, right? So instead of him being at the top, he's gonna have like other tops that are gonna be self-governing or something. I think so. And it makes sense, like as history has it, things can go bad if you have like one leader at the tippity-toppity top.
Would now separate the establishments of the Imperial military, creating and encouraging rivalries between them. In so doing, he hoped this would mean that they were less likely to be persuaded by one another should heresy occur again, and make it far more difficult for any one section to mobilize and carry out a significant campaign before it could be crushed. Prior to the end of the heresy...
Yeah, so each Primarch is self-governing. Is that what happened?
The Imperium had been overseen by the Council of Terror. These individuals managed the day-to-day running of the Imperium, but had been resented by the Primarchs for being mere mortals, as they were refused from partaking in these activities themselves. As the Emperor had instructed 𝗏ci𝗫𝗀 to find a new group of highly trusted, loyal and mentally strong individuals, some of these figures would now replace the Council of Terror to take their place as the High Lords of Terror. These figures would rule the Empire of Man for the many thousand of years to come.
Wow.
The High Lords would use the psychic whispers of the Emperor and interpret these to carry out his will and organise and manage the Imperium. The most significant change was also the most obvious. The Space Marine legions had clearly caused the majority of the damage, and it was their immense size that was the root of the problem. And so Roboute 𝗦ci𝗰𝗋 would enact the second founding of the Space Marines.
Yeah.
7 years after the death of Horus and the final traitors had largely fled from the systems of the Imperium, the remaining Loyalist legions would now be divided up from their hundreds of thousands of Marines into smaller 1,000 men strong chapters.
Yes.
The Legiones Astartes would now be known as the Adeptus Astartes. It was not a universally agreed plan though. Rogel Dawn and Leman Russ would object strongly to their beloved legions being essentially disbanded. But Khan and Korax of the White Scars and Raven Guard would side with Guilliman. The newly appointed High Lords of Terror also concurred with Guilliman that it was necessary to change to the system, and so this resolution would pass. Guilliman would also, in addition to these overall organisational changes, implement a new code of conduct for the Space Marines to follow, his fabled Codex Astartes. This laid out...
Oh, here's where that comes into play. I see. I've just been playing Space Marine 1, and it was some parts there where it was like, oh, you're defying the Codex, and this one is following the Codex, and whatever. So you can see the gameplay of me playing that on my YouTube channel, on this channel. Wow. I see.
Out the rules and guidelines on proper organisation, tactics, and order of battle for a Space Marine chapter.
Yeah.
It also laid down strict rules to avoid the dangerous orders that came to pass during the Heresy, such as the Divinian Lodge practice, which Horus enabled and subsequently would lay the seeds of betrayal
the
within
Lodge,
the legions.
man.
Needless to say, this is strictly illegal within the modern Astartes chapters. The Codex, for many other chapters of Marines, was a helpful guide on structure and practice, but for the Ultramarines, it represented the gospel word as laid down by their Primarch, and it would soon become a sacred tome for the Ultramarines, who would follow it as a strict and almost fanatical code by which they live their lives, as would the many sibling chapters who were created from the vast wealth of manpower that the Ultramarines and their superior gene seed would provide. Despite...
I'm not gonna spoil too much, but when I played Space Marine 1, I got very angry at the end, and you should check that out.
Guilliman's pride in his codex, some chapters like the Blood Angels, Dark Angels and Space Wolves adopted the codex's guidelines only in part as a sign of their continuing disagreement with the choices being made. And additionally, perhaps the fact that Guilliman was allowed to dictate the future structure of the Astartes when he had played very little actual role in the defence of Terra during the Heresy. Putting their grievances aside though, it was clear to any looking in objectively that no other Primarch than Guilliman was better suited to this task than he.
Yeah.
The Emperor's vision of a human civilization free from superstitious cults and irrational plans was far from successful. For all the amazing achievements of the Emperor, he would be ultimately defeated not by a supremely powerful alien race or a godlike demon from the warp. Instead, he was defeated by the simple fact that mankind was fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
And how tragic that despite the Emperor having learned so much from his thousands of years observing humanity, this was not enough to prevent it retracing its fatal errors time and time again. The age of the Imperium is now one of bureaucracy, of tyrants and unreason, an era of slow growth and repression. Humanity has frustratingly regressed back into religious beliefs while the Emperor sits immobile, unable to guide and enact his true will. His thoughts, we can only...
That must be insanely painful for the Emperor, though. Sitting there, knowing, seeing probably.
Glimpse at and are largely unknown. The immortal super being, whose remaining psychic power still extends over 1 million worlds, is now a ruined husk. His mortal body, to all definitions, destroyed. Although the Imperium had succeeded in preventing total annihilation from the forces of Horus and the Warp and Chaos, the cost of that conflict was unquantifiable. The ultimate loss was not that of life or territory, but the failure to establish the secular and stable empire the Emperor had hoped to create.
Sadness. The age of the Imperium of man.
The Horus Heresy was ended. Primarch Guilliman and the Ultramarines had secured the territories of the Imperium of Man, and the remaining Imperial forces had consolidated and restructured for the future and the security of the Empire. The age of the Imperium of Man would now begin, at the end of the 31st millennium. The light and hope of the glorious Crusade era was now gone forever. Without the Emperor to lead humanity directly, the immeasurable threats to the galaxy presented to human life led the High Lords of Terror to create an imperial administration that was increasingly authoritarian, highly bureaucratic and generally dismissive and uncaring towards individual human lives as long as its structure and authority was maintained. Religion also would begin to resurge as an important tool of social control. the Emperor's preferred original rationalist truth was sidelined by the growing Imperial cult, believing, as once the Word-Bearers Legion had, that the Emperor was a divine being and the saviour of mankind. Only the latter would be an accurate statement. For many people, this point in time would be the end of our story. But there's more. Despite things seeming more stable now, this would not last. An extreme and horrific attack would now come barely 500 years after the inception of the High Lords of Terror by the 𝗦ici𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 Assassinorum. This was the highly secretive and lethal assassins wing of the Imperial forces. On the orders of the Grand Master of Assassins, the High Lords were slain to a single man. A retribution force of Space Marines was dispatched to the Assassin's Temple, and despite suffering near total casualties, they were able to complete their objective and kill the Grand Master of the Assassin's Order. The Imperium would now descend into near anarchy for a period of years while a new High Council was screened and established.
Wow.
Another small aside now on the fates of the remaining Primarchs. This is one issue that is hugely frustrating, that despite the survival of many of the Primarchs through the darkest of times, many would now disappear or die, and in the overall perspective of things, often barely befitting their weight and importance. This is one bone of contention I have with the lore, as to me it seems these unique characters were essentially just written out of history as a matter of convenience. It's very frustrating. To satisfy your curiosity though, Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists would die in the last 31st millennium fighting to defend against the First Black Crusade. These were crusades launched from the Eye of Terror by the traitor legions into the Imperium.
Wow.
𝗦oci𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 would be fatally wounded during the Battle of 𝗦ici𝗰𝗶𝗹𝘀 in 121 Millennium 31. When he encountered one of the traitor Primarchs Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children, who had risen to become a demon prince of Slaanesh. Fulgrim cut Guilliman's neck with a poisonous sword that some say resembled an anatheme sword, which was used to wound Horus on the moon of Davin at the inception of the Horus Heresy. Vulcan of the Salamanders disappeared. He was seemingly disillusioned and broken after his legion's devastating losses during the Heresy. He vowed to return in the end times. However, it would appear some 1500 years later where he would defend the Imperial world Caldera against an Orc invasion. He would then return to Holy Terror and berate the High Lords of Terror for their petty squabblings. Vulcan would restate his return was only temporary and he was destined to appear in another time. He would later be recorded as killed battling an Orc warboss. The Salamanders though still hunt for him, believing he will return to them should they acquire the 9 artifacts of Vulcan. Jagatay Khan of the White Scars disappeared through a Dark Eldar warp portal whilst he was pursuing those savage Xenos after a raid on the White Scars homeworld. Rumours that he was captured whilst lost in the twisting paths of the Dark Eldar section of the Webway. Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels returned to his homeworld of Caliban to find it in ruins and some of his marines tainted by chaos. Whilst battling them, the Dark Chaos Gods unleashed a massive warp storm upon the planet, consuming the majority of structures save the Dark Angel's own fortress. But when the storms abated, the Lion was nowhere to be found. The Dark Angels hold amongst their number many rumours about where he is and how he will one day return to them. Corax of the Raven Guard wanted to repopulate his legion after the Isfahan 5 massacre. He sought to accelerate the growth of his legion by obtaining a sample of the pure Primarch DNA from Terra that the Emperor had used to create his sons. The Emperor psychically implanted...
That is sneaky. That is sneaky. But it's a little bit sad that these like Primarchs just like disappear, die, they're gone, or just like hide away.
The memory of the ancient laboratory in his mind to allow Corax to carry out this mission, and the needed genetic material was obtained. Now though, infiltrators within the Raven Guard from the chaos-tainted Alpha Legion used a demonic essence to corrupt this pure Primarch DNA sample, causing many newly created Raven Guard to become distorted, abhorrent mutants. Corax would become so ashamed, guilt-stricken and disillusioned with himself that he isolated himself away for a whole year, begging the Emperor's spirit for forgiveness, before he would ultimately fly alone straight into the Eye of Terror to wreak revenge on the traitors.
Whoa.
Leman Russ of the Space Wolves is one of the Primarchs whose disappearance appears to be voluntary. The Space Wolves hold a legend that says Russ went on a quest to find a means to cure the Emperor with the fruit from the mystical Tree of Life.
What?
But the truth is likely to be far more complex. Others have said that Russ travelled into the Eye of Terror to lead his lost 13th Company against Magnus the Red and the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion. Still, other legends hold that Russ was dying and that he shall return to when the Imperium most needs him, the period called the Wolf Time, to lead the Wolves of Fenris once more.
Wow.
With the Primarchs gone, the Chapter Masters would take command and the High Lords of Terror would truly become now the rulers of the Imperium. Thankfully though, this poor and horrific start to the Imperium would now be replaced by 3 millennia of strength and stability from the period of M32 to M35. The Imperium was able to re-establish roots with most of its major colonies, as well as securing and bringing
Okay, so this is to M35. I see. Wow.
into the Imperium many new colonies not reached during the Crusades, who proved to be immeasurably valuable. As an added bonus, Imperial forces were able to secure an incredibly rare and well-preserved STC from the Dark Age of technology, which further boosted the development of new technology.
Wow.
This also served to demonstrate to the Mechanicum of Mars that the Imperium was still a worthwhile ally and deserving of their continued partnership without even the Emperor. Despite the carnage and appalling threats occurring in the universe, a great many worlds within the Imperium see none of this in their lifetime, and some worlds have the good fortune to actually live in relative peace. In fact, many Imperial systems actually have very little interaction with the structure or forces of the Imperium. To many citizens, the prospect of actually seeing a fabled space marine of the Imperium, these semi-godlike figures, is a lifelong dream, and one that very few people actually get to experience. The Space Marines are not posted to all planets, there are simply just too few of them now for this to be feasible. Instead, they maintain a presence on the most threatened or precarious of systems, defending the Imperium against the worst Xenos concentrations or assisting the Inquisition to seek out and destroy any signs of corruption. They also continue the search for the STCs, the holy grails of the Imperium, relics of immeasurable value. The safety of the Imperium is maintained through fact-finding missions and reports from psychers across light years of space. The Adeptus Administratum maintain a highest level of information possible so that all Imperial forces can focus their diminished resources on the most likely locations at risk. Frustratingly though, and almost unbelievably, the Imperium would now sanction religion, as many Imperial cults had risen, dedicating to the worship of the Emperor as the god of mankind. The majority of these would become unified into a centralized religious body known as the Ecclesiarchy. This powerful...
Yeah, now we're getting into like more of the ecclesiarchy and the religion, and it's those that couldn't have like men, right, or something, fighters, and then they just got ladies.
Church gained momentum until the 32nd millennium, where it became the official state religion of the Imperium and the title of Adeptus Ministorum. Centuries later, Ecclesiarch Venerus II receives a seat amongst the High Lords of Terror, and after 300 standard years, the seat reserved for the Ecclesiarch is made a permanent addition to the ranks of the High Lords of Terror. Given that the Lords are meant to infer the Emperor's psychic whispers and wishes, these actions make you question how little they are actually able to communicate with the Emperor, or perhaps how much they choose to...
Yeah, have they not really communicated with the Emperor at all? Or what the hell is going on? The Emperor has like a very strong stance on religion. Very strong stance. So this is very messed up.
...to ignore, given the fact that the Emperor flew into a near rage when he discovered the actions of the Word-bearers during the Great Crusade.
Yeah.
Should the Emperor ever return to the Imperium reincarnated, which is entirely feasible, those pledged to any Imperial religion or who took a hand in its establishment would be wise to expect a harsh judgment from the Emperor, who despised all forms of religion and saw them as nothing but a problem for the advancement of humanity. The Imperium of Man would stand until its current date of the 41st millennium, and despite its often counterproductive bureaucracy, it continues to function and maintain a strong fighting force within the galaxy. Member worlds generally govern themselves as long as they recognise the authority of the Emperor and his appropriate civil servants and support the state religion, the Imperial cult, which places the Emperor as the divine being, the true god of mankind. Every world of the Imperium pays also the imperial taxes levied on them, but not in monetary form. They pay in men and materials, known as the Imperial Tithe. The Imperial Tithe supports the overall economy of the Imperium by redistributing resources where needed, supporting one region by drawing resources from more peaceful sectors. The Imperium promotes the development of a neo-feudal political system, which the High Lords of Terror and the Inquisition have decided to be the most stable form of human government. This essentially means that a ruling class or powerful family oversee the needs of the planet. This intense need for political stability and the growing military demands upon the imperial system have created a repressive state, and the belief in the divine emperor has only reduced scientific progress to a minimum.
Not great.
Ancient technology from the Unification Wars and Crusades, or even the Dark Age of technology, are merely maintained and are rarely pushed forward. This stagnation has led to many to describe this period leading on from the dawn of the 40th millennium as the time of ending for mankind. It must be said, though, that with the admittedly often repressive and regularly harsh regime of the Imperium, the protection it provides, mankind as a whole would have been consumed by the seemingly endless dangers that threaten it. Without the Emperor, there would be no Imperium of Man, and without the Imperium and mankind's faith in the Emperor, the human race would have surely become extinct long ago. Still, despite all of this, you could in many ways argue that even with all the flaws and failings, the Emperor had achieved most of the goals he had set in order to make mankind a stable and powerful force within the galaxy. Or did he? At first glance, the forging of the Imperium of Man and the Imperial Truth during the Great Crusade seems to be a great contradiction. If the Emperor, who had lived for many thousands of years and who, due to his own extreme psychic power, knew intimately the realm of the warp and the creatures therein, why would he propagate a system designed to only support rationalism and science? It seems feasible to speculate that the Emperor had plans that reached far beyond the Crusades and the creation of the Imperium, and that these had barely even begun to pass. In that sense, the Imperium and the Legiones Astartes...
Yeah, I wonder what would have happened if this didn't go wrong. Wow.
...was a catastrophic failure. We can speculate that the Emperor's overall goal was the total destruction of the Chaos Gods and those dark forces that would threaten mankind. The Emperor had fair reason to turn humanity to a secular society, having witnessed many times over the will of men transforming a faith based on the tenets of loving your fellow man and respect for one another into bloody creeds of appalling violence, repression, murder, and wholesale genocide. These actions, as with the Eldar, would actually strengthen the Chaos Gods. So the Emperor perceived that religion and faith was something that had no benefit in his current aspirations.
Yeah.
In a sense, he was correct when you look at the facts on paper, and also when you consider the Wordbearers Legion and how it would take them significantly longer than any other Astartes Legion when converting the worlds they found to the divine cult of the Emperor. The Emperor had decided that during the Age of Strife, it was time for him to come to the fore and take control of the situation. He feared that unless all of mankind was united, it would eventually be consumed by the nightmares facing the galaxy, including Chaos and other Xenos races. By enforcing the Imperial Truth on every colony of humanity in the galaxy, the Emperor had hoped to forge a belief in rational thinking and science so strong that the warp creatures of Chaos who lived off the dark energy and negative emotions of humanity would become permanently weakened to the point that they might even dissolve from the warp. The only problem with this plan would be that the dark forces were far from weak when the Emperor brought his plan to its inception. They were at the height of their power, feasting off the perverse fall of the Eldar Empire. So from the beginning, Chaos sought to destroy his plans, or at the very least significantly disrupt them. Ultimately, as it would play out, they would be successful to this end.
Wow, yeah.
When looking at this period as a whole, it would be fair conclusion to say that the Emperor deeply underestimated humanity's basic need for at least a proportion of society to believe in something larger than itself, beyond the sterile confines of science and technology. In many ways, the grim comedy of the whole affair is that the Emperor rigidly maintained that he should never be worshipped as a divine being, but as just a man, albeit an unbelievably powerful man. His questionable judgment in laying the foundations of the Imperium and later the Crusades proved his own proclamations that he was indeed just a man, capable of miscalculations as any mortal human.
That is a good point there. That is a good point.
Yet despite this, he still would end up becoming worshipped as a divine being. You could call the whole series of events a tragedy, especially in the sense that legions of religious worshippers and pilgrims of the Imperium could never understand the irony of worshipping a man who had, over the course of millennia, done everything in his power to extinguish religion from the human race.
Yeah.
To rub salt into the wound, though, it is especially contentious that the binding factor in holding the Imperium together after the Heresy was in part, of course, the Ultramarines, but also, significantly, religious faith in the Emperor himself. Added to this, though, humanity's religious faith in the godlike Emperor would actually empower his psychic form in the warp and enable him to combat chaos on their own plane, as well as continuing to guide and protect humanity in the material world through the Astronomicon and his ever-guiding light.
Wow.
Which all seems ultimately ironic.
Yeah.
That for all of the Emperor's efforts to destroy organized religion, it would ultimately become his saving grace. Though the price for the survival of the Imperium and humanity had been at a level beyond comprehension and a cost far greater than the Emperor hoped humanity would have had to bear, a new version of the Imperial truth had become predominant among the million worlds of mankind. A truth that lies at the heart of the Imperial Creed. A simple truth that strengthens all from the weakest human citizen to the most powerful superhuman Astartes. The Emperor protects.
Wow. Wow, I think I'm not gonna see the outro there because I have a feeling it's gonna be a lot of copyrighted music. Maybe I had to cut out the last part there. I don't know. But this was intense, insane. I went through a huge journey, and you did as well, following this, looking at this with me. Wow. Like, I feel like I went through a couple of like stages of my own emotions here. Because first it was like going into this with the with all of the ages that humanity went through, and then the previous episode ended before the Horus Heresy, so it was like things were like the Great Crusade, things were going pretty well, and then we opened today's video with like the Horus Heresy, the brutal wars, all of the horrible things they went through, and then we go into a new phase of like trying to rebuild, trying to get our feet under us again. But then like some Primarchs disappear, the religion starts to like religion of like the Emperor basically starts to take over, more like bureaucracy and like basically dictatorships on different planets. It's so many things that are just going wrong, but also right at the same time, which is because they managed to like get control over so much again. But it's leaving me with like this feeling that we are currently in a really bad time, but also a good time, but a really bad time. So it's like so many emotions and like roller coaster, emotional roller coaster, up and down, and like whoa, and then we end up here now, and I don't know what to feel. It's like I'm still like super duper invested, but I'm like a little bit sad. But there's another part, right? I think so. So stay tuned for that. Like and subscribe. Get ready for when it's gonna come. And thank you so much for watching with me. I love you guys. See you later, alligator. Oh, remember to watch these and click the links. See you later. Bye bye.